Derwin, hi.
Hello,
so
Rob.
nice to be on your farm.
Great to see you here. After all these years we've been talking, and now finally you've arrived.
We've come here to have a really important conversation with you, and it really is about farming and real food. There are people out there who have demonized meat. We have a climate change crisis, we've got an environmental crisis, a biodiversity crisis, but I don't want to make any judgments about your age, but you've been in farming for some time now.
Thank you.
And you will have seen a history of the demonization of certain fats like margarine, omega-6 fatty acids. You're involved as a linseed farmer. Where are we going? Can you perhaps say a few words initially before we go into detail about, is farming going to survive? And
Okay.
we've got Brexit to think about as well.
We've got a whole lot of stuff, haven't you? Yeah, I guess really up until 20 years ago when I started working with linseed, I really didn't know very much about all of these issues as well. And I think, like the medical profession and the farming profession, we were sucked into a chemical and industrial world. And we all thought, this is a good thing. It's dealing with our weeds. It's answering a lot of problems. And now, increasingly, farmers and doctors are thinking, hang on, we've actually gone down the wrong road. And they're talking about gut health and the biome of the gut. And there's a biome of the soil as well. And farmers are talking about that. So I certainly hope that real farming will continue. And if we decide that we're going to look after the soil properly, it can do. And that, I think, means going back a little bit and having smaller mixed farms that don't have such an impact. So obviously we've got to feed ourselves, and we can feed ourselves. We've got to stop throwing away food and probably stop eating too much, that kind of thing, and then get things back into balance.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, it's a nice way of perhaps looking at the issue of balance. Coming back to fats and essential fatty acids, people become very fixated on carbohydrates, the one macronutrient category that we don't actually need.
Yes.
But they don't think so much about fats, and particularly the quality of fats and essential fats. And of course there's a big focus now on protein, because where are we going to get all our protein from? So coming back to fats, where does linseed, where does flaxseed, for many people, for many vegetarians and vegans, it's the go-to fat. Is that one of the reasons you are big on linseed and flaxseed?
Well, it's not really, but that I came to learn a lot. All I knew when I started with linseed is that when you feed your animals or your livestock, there used to be linseed oil cake, which used to come to farms in slabs, which were about 1 foot wide and about 3 feet long, and every little farmer had a kibbling machine, broke them up and fed them to the cattle, and their coats shone. And I knew that, but that came to an end in the mid-50s practically, and I remember father having those slabs and breaking them up. And of course, when that stopped, and it stopped largely because we stopped having lino on the floor and went to vinyl. Lino was made with linseed, so there was huge quantities of it. And actually a lot came from America too, because almost every state had a linseed oil factory, and they exported the oil cake to Europe. So we had a tremendous amount of it. So it was a part of the ruminant diet. Although nowadays I think that our animals should be eating just grass, and there's a big group doing that as well. And the fact that we fed them cereals and soya, and that's been mentioned too, about the effect of importing soya and feeding it to animals on the rainforest in Brazil. So that there is a whole lot of issues going on there, but basically let's feed our animals grass and teach people that then they're having something with the right balance of fats in them. If you want to be vegan or vegetarian, that's fine, good ethical reasons for doing that, but don't put out misinformation.
Yeah. So if you look at this division that's increasingly getting into the public's vocabulary about the difference between industrial farming and, if you like, more traditional methods of farming, do you think this is a real difference? I mean, is it a useful thing for the public to grab hold on? I want to have food that's not produced through industrial farming. What does that actually mean in terms of the quality of the foods that you consume and what the animals are fed?
Yeah, I think it's terribly important, and it is a good way of trying to engage with people about it. If you can do that in a way that people kind of understand, you've got to have that little hook, haven't you? You've got to get that little hook in people to get them interested. And I say to people, oh, do you know your brain is 60% fat? And when you were called fathead at school, it wasn't an insult. You really want a fat head. And do you know how to feed your brain? And people haven't got a clue that they need to be maybe eating the right fats for them. But we do know that we've got a huge problem with mental health issues, like 25%. And there's so much of a problem that even Lloyds Bank had an advert on the television a while ago, and they said 25% of our staff have mental health problems, and also 25% of our customers. So if they can say that, for God's sake, we can talk a little bit more about the importance of understanding fat and where it comes from and not doing damage to it. And that's what's happened, I think, in the last 60 years. Everybody can ask their mother or grandmother how did they roast their potatoes or cook, and it was probably with lard or dripping, and people had dripping sandwiches. And we moved from that to cooking with oil, and that is when the start of our illness, increase in all sorts of illness, really happened.
Yeah, but that was very processed, industrially processed oils.
Yes.
So we look at what governments are telling people they should, on average, consume less than 35% of all energy from fats, and it gives the impression that the lower the amount of fat that you consume, the better, because it doesn't say stop at 20%, it says less than 35. So there's still a lot of 0% fat products out in the supermarkets. Clearly you're not a fan of that particular guideline from governments.
No, well, it's just it started off as a lie with our friend Ansel Keys, who did a lot of damage in that area, and it continues. And when I see supermarkets saying, oh, we've got less saturated fat in them, I think, yes, they're going to be putting more sugar in and other rubbish, which is more damaging. And why is that happening? And it's obviously, I think, things like maybe the Food Standards Agency and government is too much in the pocket of the big food business in some way, and we need to actually jump out of there and think that we need to start going back, as I said, that little step to a more connected.
Yeah, there is of course now an increased understanding of the effects of processing on foods, including fats.
Yes.
So there is, for example, the NOVA scale, which has a 4-point scale looking at unprocessed, minimally processed to ultra-processed foods. If people, even as a voluntary measure, but subsequently perhaps as a mandatory measure, the average person could begin to see the degree of processing that's been applied. Do you think that might help?
I think it's got to be a good thing if people realise that if they could go into, and I've had lots of people actually come to talks here, and they said, oh, they used to work for Vandenberg's, can I say that? or in a margarine factory, and they said, I wouldn't eat it. So, if people could see that happening, maybe they'd say, oh, well, I'm not going to eat it either.
Yeah, well, I think looking at some of the big trends, looking at a company like Unilever that built its reputation with the Lever brothers on margarine, having now got rid of all their margarine interests, is perhaps a sign of the times. So just looking at essential fatty acids as a source of, or an essential source of foods for developing humans, for pregnant women, for older people, where do you think the solution is in terms of the farming community and the food products? Have we got everything we need in a supermarket, or should people be buying less processed foods from the farm gate? Where are you at with that?
Well, actually, that's a bit of a strange one, really, because lots of farmers' markets started, and of course farmers wanted then to sell their products into supermarkets. So actually quite a lot of farming products are in big stores, and farmers' markets are kind of dying a little bit, which is really not what we want to happen. But also the whole high street is dying, and it would be great if from the point of view of of conservation and the plastic and all of those things. When you went to a shop and bought your vegetables, it came in a paper bag. Although I know that's not, sometimes paper is actually more destructive than plastic. So
depending on the plastic, where it comes from.
It's a difficult thing. But fatty acids, you've got to have the right balance. And mostly people haven't got any idea, you know, they might have heard of omega-3, but they probably won't have heard of omega-6 and maybe not 9. But it's really important for us to know about those things, and especially for pregnant women. I think they often talk about baby brain. Have you heard them talking about that? And you say to them, well, do you know what that is? And they don't know. And I say, well, there's a cause. And the cause is because that omega-3 is the only substance in your body that when you're pregnant, the baby can take all of it. And it's hardwired into your blood system, so it's like taking from the brain, so your brain can shrink. And that's not good. So, and when I've told people that, they say, well, why aren't we told that? And I said, well, I don't know, but you know, we need to keep spreading that message because there are reasons for things happening. And that's what I think our role now is, to try and get to the bottom of it. We could start actually a completely new food system. There's so much allowed into food that shouldn't be there. And if we said, okay, well, let's take this opportunity today to say, right, farmers and doctors need to work together to work out what is good food for us, and then we produce that. And we could use also that as a measure to stop unwanted food being imported into the country, because we could reposition ourselves and say, we are going to be the headlight or the leading country in the world who is going to deal with the food and health issue. And we want to follow that.
What some academics are obviously saying is that when you look at the climate change crisis and you look at the contribution of agriculture, and of course in terms of greenhouse gas emissions it's very variable, and of course one of the reasons that meat has been so demonized is that the figures have been drawn out of industrial farming systems where you're taking into account the animals that are fed on soy and maize, for example, that's being shipped from one side of the world to another. So I want to ask you, in terms of managing the metrics of looking at the impact of farming on climate change, do you believe that the farming community has the know-how to really know if it is contributing positively to the environment?
I certainly think that the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, as a group dedicated to feeding animals properly, are doing a tremendous amount of work in that area, and they're also looking at how you measure. You know, different laboratories might measure things in different ways. So sometimes you might be comparing some figures with other figures, and they're not measured in the same way to begin with. So there's a whole lot of things going on, and this group is actually trying to get to the bottom of what is the right way to measure things and how much carbon cows are actually or land can sequestrate if you have a grass-fed system.
Absolutely. So there are more and more people who are suggesting that the traditional systems of farming that have been going now for 10,000 years or so are going to collapse in the next 20-30 years, and we need to make way for meat analogues, cell-based technologies, fermentation units, microalgae, and basically get rid of this kind of farming. What's your view?
I don't know how you could possibly expect me to agree with that. But we have
want you to comment on it.
Oh, comment on it.
Comment on it.
Right, we've got the perfect machines already to convert the grass into meat that we need, so we don't have to bother with factories. Factories have already done us a lot of damage with processed food, so we don't want to go down that road again, surely.
Are you suggesting maybe that those kind of trends are being pushed along by certain business interests that might really benefit from meat analogues, for example?
I guess that's true. Yeah. What but the average person surely just wants to be healthy and eat healthy food, and we've got to help them to understand what that is.
In the time that you've been farming, do you think people have become less connected with nature and wildlife, or are they now at crisis point where they're feeling the need to reconnect?
Yes, definitely they've been disconnected. And yes, many people are feeling that they want to reconnect. And I think that's why it's really strange, when we've invited practitioners and doctors, they've actually come to the farm. They don't feel it's unusual or something. And we've had different events here. We've even had events on Alzheimer's and dementia that I ran with a naturopath. And we advertised it normally, and a few doctors turned up to that. So farming is really important, and it's really important to get that right. So we want to get the soil right, the biome of the soil right, and we want it to absorb moisture and help prevent flooding. All of those things that farming can give to the country and to people are, I think, being increasingly valued, and people want to reconnect a little bit, but it's still quite small. And probably the reason we're talking is because as a farmer I've reached out and gone to all sorts of different conferences and met you, and often those conferences, whether they're agricultural ones or medical ones, they're so vibrant and people are so enthusiastic with everything. Absolutely. And the idea is, my idea, and I'm sure yours is, to see if we can spread that enthusiasm
Absolutely.
to a wider audience.
Yeah. Well, look, can we talk about the B word, Brexit?
Right.
So Brexit obviously has a lot of opportunities. It has challenges as well. Can you just talk about the positive? What could actually happen in a good case scenario? At the moment, a huge amount of food is imported from the EU. The payments that come through from the EU end up in a very small proportion of landowners.
Well, I think
largely.
that's certainly happened in the past. If my understanding is correct, something like 80% of the money that came from Europe went to 20% of the richest farmers, and that helped increase industrialisation and drove small farmers from the land. It increased the value of land and it increased the rents. So many farmers who rented from big landowners might well be paying all of that money to the landowners in increased rent. Something like that went on. So you could say that Europe has caused more harm to the farming industry in this country and to people, because we've got worse food and more food-related illness than ever. And that's why I say, as we were just talking earlier, surely it's an opportunity to say, let's be a beacon in this country for food and health, and make sure that we can continue that way. We're happy to import food from every country that you like if you want, and across the channel is not very far, so I'm sure we'd all like French cheese to keep coming in. So we don't want a war, and that's why I voted to go into Europe in the first place. No war and free trade, and so we could talk to people. We didn't vote for federalism, and the Catalans and others have shown us how that federalism takes people's individuality away, and they don't want that. They want to be individuals. So I'm worried about it. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know some things in the past were not right. I think it's changing, and I don't think that everybody is happy with that change. And if we can get back, as I was saying earlier, get back to this balance, so people are talking to each other rather than fighting each other.
Well, look, it's interesting.
Maybe they're using food as a weapon.
Yeah, I mean, I've been interviewed as an expert for the National Food Strategy, and you have for the Food Farming and Countryside Commission through the RSA. So our voices are being heard. And would you agree that there is a lot of interest at very high levels to see something really innovative and new developing in the field of British farming that actually could be good for not only for the people from a health point of view, but also for the environment?
I think that's right. And there's a farming conference in Oxford. There are two of them now, and there's one called the Real Farming Conference, and that has now 1,000 delegates, and there's 300 in the corporate one. And all of those people are, as I said before, being enthusiastic and thinking about things in a macro way, if you like. Yes, it will be good for people and good for the environment, but if we start to eat food that is healthy for us, why do we want a huge drugs bill when we could spend a little bit more money on food?
I've had a long involvement with the Soil Association. I used to be a technical advisor to them when I was at Imperial College. And obviously they are very much behind this notion of sustainable agroecological methods of farming. Some critics, particularly academics that don't spend a lot of time on farms, are suggesting that mixed farms, agroecological farms, are really not capable of delivering the productivity that is needed to feed the world's population in 30, 40 years. What's your view on that?
Well, I think that's probably rubbish. I think we can feed ourselves.
That's what I was hoping you were going to say, by the
way. we throw so much food away, don't we? And we're eating a bit too much, I'm sure. So I think it's scaremongering to say we can't feed ourselves.
Derwin, my own view is that what we have is incredibly different problems depending on which geography we're in. So if you come at it using a sort of global modelling perspective, and you look at places in the world where there is going to be massive population growth, projected population growth, like sub-Saharan Africa, clearly the solution there is very different for the solution in Europe. But actually, in Europe, for example, we don't see population growth. So what we need is more stable systems that we can make us more self-sufficient. And perhaps an agroecological approach at a much larger scale is feasible.
Yes, I think so. Actually, when you think there's a huge amount of exporting of foods from some of those countries that are actually very poor, so they're exporting the resources that they need for their own communities, and maybe they're buying guns, I don't know what they're doing, but there's a huge amount of corruption in a lot of those places. So when we talk about those things, I think we've got to be quite careful, or at least start to understand that linked food is often used as a weapon in some ways, and that's what's happening. But there are lots of people going into Africa and helping, in a small way, women learning how to grow more things. Yeah. And also with medicines, Anamed, what medicines can be from plants.
As the ISTAT report said back in 2008, with 400 scientists from 60 countries researching it over a 5-year period, is that actually agroecological methods are entirely applicable to sub-Saharan Africa, but you would need a different way of doing things. You would need to make sure that the major seed companies like Monsanto weren't selling people either GM or F1 varieties, and they were producing their own seed again. So
grow what's appropriate to your area.
Exactly. So agroecology is a pretty different approach to farming compared with, or to nutrition, human nutrition, compared with lab-grown meats. But you think it is?
I'd rather do.
Yeah. So you still think it is the future?
Yeah, I think farmers have been denigrated for many years, and sometimes they've said, "Oh, you're just accountants and you drive Range Rovers around," and of course, thousands of small farmers have been driven out. But I think they were really important, and if they'd been valued more, then we might be in a different situation today. And of course, doctors, I think, and farmers are still fairly high on the suicide list, and that dentists as well, I believe. And I think some of the reason for that is maybe they're not working in accordance with their core belief. Sometimes might not even know what their core belief is. Exactly. Farmers, hopefully, a core was, I want to produce food or healthy food for people, but they've been forced into a system that doesn't allow them to do that. And I think doctors are the same. They've been forced into a system where they're not allowed to use their intelligence to holistically heal people, and they have to follow a protocol. And if you have to do that all your life, you're going to be driven mad, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, Derwin, it's been fascinating talking to you. I think what you're really saying, you're talking about real food for real people, and you're also talking about the need to get the information out to create, if you like, a revolution from the bottom up. Am I right?
Yeah, I think it's hearts and minds and not bombs, really, that's going to do this job. Yes. And if we can do that, and people have walked through this field and they've come through the farm and they're just happy. They said, "Oh, isn't that beautiful?"
So is that dragonfly very, very happy?
Yeah, so I mean, this is not going to produce any food for humans, but it is going to produce a lot of food for birds and insects over the winter.
Yeah.
Which is going to be great.
This is biodiversity in action. I've been talking to Derwin Banks in Sussex at the linseed farm. Thank you very much for listening.